Well, once again, I stumbled upon a second season episode of Strange New Worlds being the second show. See, it's all appropriate and everything. So, did it get a little better than the last one, which was pretty bad? No, not really. There's a few pluses in here. Captain Pike shows up for a little bit, enough to get, number one, a lawyer, almost at the cost of his life because he couldn't breathe the atmosphere, so he deliberately waited in the waiting room with this lawyer who refused to see him until he passed out and flatlined. Yeah, I thought that was funny. Anyway, he gets the lawyer, and then he goes back to the kitchen and argues with his girlfriend, who has been selected to be the chief prosecutor against number one. Now, right off the bat, I'll give them this. They do all of this so it's going to be a courtroom drama, and the old Star Trek did that. Remember when Kirk was framed for murder, but it turned out there was no murder because the victim had faked it all just to get back at Kirk? All that stuff. And then the ultimate case from his lawyer, who was an eccentric guy, was that the only real witness was the computer. And, of course, the computer was flawed. It had been manipulated. And so Kirk, was framed and all that. So that was the deal there. So yeah, they use Star Trek and borrowed the template of courtroom drama from Perry Mason and stuff like that. And put it in Star Trek. So, hey, let's do the same thing here. So they do. But the plus here was that they wrap up this number one story in one episode. I mean, it was revealed previous season that number one is not human, as previously believed, and has superpowers. I mean, super strong, and all of that. But the whole thing is immediately very, very stupid, not just because they've changed number one and given her more of a background, which we didn't have much. He was only briefly in that first pilot, which doesn't give you a whole lot. Even her name. I mean, her name was not number one. So they gave her one and all that. But here, once again, they wrap it up in, hey, you want to know something? Turns out bigotry's wrong. And in case you didn't know, that's what Strange New Worlds is here to teach you. That's right. Now, of course, granted, Star Trek has done stories on bigotry and racism and stuff like that. Usually they would go to some other planet where this was going on, and then they'd get a lecture from Kirk or Picard or something like that. But for whatever reason, I wonder what it could be. Maybe it's because they always see Starfleet and the Federation as a metaphor for the United States. And to be honest, that's often been the case throughout Star Trek. But for Secret Hideout, that means it's really bad. So despite all the ideals, which they readily admit throughout the episode of Starfleet and the Federation, more importantly, and how it's all these different peoples from different worlds coming together and all that, decided to call it a bigoted institution. Because they outlawed augments because of the eugenics war and how terrible that was, that genetic manipulation is banned. But carrying that over for someone like Una, number one here, who wanted to join Starfleet since she was a little girl, would not be allowed to. Wasn't even supposed to be living on Earth, but she and her family, they snuck in, I wonder what that's supposed to be familiar with. And she wouldn't have been allowed, but it's like, it's not her fault. She was a kid. Her people did this at the time, and then there's all these analogies that, well, this was our culture and all that sort of thing, on and on and on. But at the outset of it is, why would they be banned outright? I mean, the process, you can understand why Earth itself would ban it after their experience with it and that sort of thing. But it really made no sense as to why the whole people of Illyria would be punished for this. Because it goes against an awful lot of the standards of the Federation and the very nature of it. So, it's almost as if someone didn't think it through. No, it's not almost as if. That's exactly what happened here. So, you know, you got your characters who stand around and pose, and the lawyer, she's the greatest thing ever. Oh, boy, is she feisty. She attacks Robert Averill, and that's the thing. Robert Averill, the first captain of the Enterprise, he's put on the stand, and turns out he's been violating the Prime Directive several times over, and he was going, oh, yeah, but those people would have died, but yeah, that's not an exemption to it. And the tribunal's like, nah, well, you know. And I mean, she was making the point that, hey, you just pick and choose what laws you want to obey. So, you know, they just chalked it up. Well, the Admiral's not on trial. Later on, they put Captain Pike on trial because it turns out he knew about number one a few months before she is ultimately found out and arrested. So, well, you just said the Admiral could do whatever he wanted. So it was really stupid. But it's wrapped in the superficial elements of, hey, we're making a stand. You know, we wanted everybody to understand that water is wet, because otherwise they would never know. And so, but ultimately, how do you get out of this? Because they're determined to charge her. They'd offered her a deal; she would still be discharged from the service, but she wouldn't serve any prison time and all that. But now she was facing 20 years in the penal colony somewhere because she wouldn't take the deal, which again is really stupid. Because why would the Federation do that? It's like, you know, well, they were scared of eugenics and all that, you know. Okay, so now you kind of painted yourself in a corner. So what do? Super smart lawyer figures it out. Well, she dusts off an old law book and discovers, hey, Una fits the perfect criteria for asylum. Yeah. So the laws conflict with one another. So the court rules, oh, well, we can't really punish her because she can seek asylum, but I still don't know if that would fit in with Starfleet regulations. But they decide, hey, we're going to drop all charges and just forget this ever happened. Now, you see the problem here. Multitude of problems, obviously. The whole show is stupid and not thought through. But the super duper pooper scooper lawyer, that's the first argument she should have made. You know, in chambers, you know, before they even start the trial, you know, the judge was, oh, oops. Yeah, we need to bone up on our laws and stuff. But, you know, we had to grandstand and do all this stuff, and how she was upset with Una. They had been childhood friends or something like that, and she felt that Una had abandoned her people to go live with the bigots on Earth and all that sort of stuff. And, you know, so you had to do all that and, pose a lot, you know. And that was about it. So this would have been one of the cheaper episodes, since they only had to shoot it in a couple of rooms. And that all worked out. But and of course, like I already said, Pike, he got to cook again. But it wasn't fun because he was fighting with his girlfriend. You know, he wasn't happy that she was, you know, doing her job. And it also went on and on about all these regulations and stuff. And there's even a scene where Uhura is being asked to look into the logs because Lady Khan is trying to figure out who revealed Una. Not that it's relevant, it really isn't. But it turns out she thought it might have been her accidentally when she recorded this in her personal log. It wasn't. Turns out Una decided to turn herself in. So this was some grand revelation or something. Who cares? But anyway, she's trying to figure out, because she wanted all the data on the logs and whatnot, and Uhura says, well, that goes against regulations. And she says, yeah, but I'm a superior officer and I'm giving you an order. And she says, yeah, but you don't have the status to be able to order that. And it was interesting because when do any of you guys obey, rank and everything? They're constantly mocking Pike and all that. And cracking jokes and stuff, and all of a sudden it mattered, you know. I mean, Uhura was right, you know. He says, no, I'm not doing that. But it's like, see, when you do it like you're supposed to, and then the next episode or within a few minutes you violate it again, that just shows the stupidity and inconsistency of the narratives and whatnot. They did have one scene. It was it was the humor scene at Spock's expense, but it is sort of similar to the type of things they would have done on the old show. So the chief prosecutor, who was like the boss of Pike's girlfriend, so I guess technically he's the district attorney, but well, of course this isn't Starfleet, so I guess he would just be chief prosecutor or whatever. He was an old colleague of Sarek, and Spock apparently did not like him. So there's a scene where Mbenga and what's her name? Is it Torres? You know, the pilot of the Enterprise. You know, the haircut and everything. I forget. Anyway, she and Mbenga are sitting at a table, and he's saying, "Hey, look over at Spock over there." And she's like, "Ah, what?" And the two Vulcans are just staring at each other, and he's saying, "Oh boy, they do not like each other." And he says, "Well, how do you tell?" "Well, you know, when you know Vulcans as well as I do, you can tell by their body language." And then all of a sudden, Spock gets up, excuses himself from the table, and walks over to them, and "I apologize for you having to witness that outburst." Because, you know, really nothing happened. And, you know, Bingo says, don't worry about it. We'll never mention it. And he says, "Well, thank you." And, of course, they have a little giggle because, you know, you call that an outburst. You know, that was the joke. But, all right, yeah, that kind of scene probably would have played out in a Star Trek episode. And that's about it. And the other thing that's a plus here is that they wrapped up this #1 story in one episode. Now, granted, it was, you know, concocted last season, and what's going to happen? And it was the cliffhanger for last season. She gets arrested. So, all right, yeah. But I was thinking this was going to be an ongoing thing for the entirety of the season, and then resolve it at the final episode. But no, right in the second episode, they hurry up, wrap this up, and then move on to something else. Which, you know, in the episodic nature of Star Trek, as it should be, yeah, I'll give them that. Kind of, sort of. Some of the elements, the uniforms and the courthouse scene, they did have nods to back when Kirk was put on trial. And even with the data tapes, it was just, you know, the little squares put into the modules, and they did their own version of that. It's not exactly like it, but it's similar. Their dress uniforms were similar to the ones that were seen in the old show. But still, of course, the only way to view this is an alternate universe of Star Trek, because, you know, characters meeting characters when they really shouldn't have. It should be years later. Most notably, you know, Christine Chapel shouldn't be there at all. And Mbenga announced himself as chief medical officer. So I'm like, well, why was he demoted for McCoy later on? You know, I don't know. And where's Boyce? You know, doesn't make any sense. I mean, I know why, because of their obsession with superficial nonsense, really. But him being around and all that, well, I could see how that could work, but he's the only doctor they show, you know, so yeah. But again, they don't care. This is an alternate reality, and so Dr. Mbenga was the doctor during this Pike's tenure. And at least he's more on the job than Pike these days. Pike is still very much just the cook of the Enterprise. And now that #1's back, at least they'll have a commanding officer. Till recently, they basically just had, I guess, Lady Khan and Spock. That was about it. So anyway, there you go. You're all caught up. Oh, and I did notice also that the first episode of this season is up for free on YouTube. So, oh boy, I bet you can't wait to treat yourself to that, huh? Well, don't bother. I mean, it's up to you, but that'd be my advice.